It's that time of day where it's really hard to know whether you say good morning or good afternoon. So I'm gonna just say like, hello. Fuck yeah, thank you for being here. Oh, I already cussed on the live stream. So my name's Ejeris Dixon, and thank you, lovelies. I'm the founding director of Vision Change Win Consulting, and thank you, and I'm also the co-editor of a forthcoming book with Leah over here called Beyond Survival, Strategies and Stories of the Transformative Justice Movement. There's more to say, but there's the internet, and there's also, handshakes, conversation, and other ways we can meet each other. So just my own history is that I've been in the transformative justice movement, and kind of been doing work around violence for about half my life at this point. So that's me. Welcome to the panel on addressing harm. And I want to say thank you, Miriam, for all your work on this. Thank you to folks at Barnard. And also thanks all of you. You're here in a room. It's a beautiful day outside. You could be at brunch. You're here to talk about harm. You're here to talk about accountability. You made some really crucial choices with your time. I want to honor that. I want to thank you for the work because there's a tiny part of that work that is about what happens here and a much bigger part of that work that happens in us being in community together. So one of the pieces that I think is really important to talk about as we open this conversation is that in the time period in which I've been within this movement, we're having less of a conversation around why abolition and why transformative justice, and more of a conversation about what and how, right? Even the last plenary, the conversation was what is accountability, right? This is about addressing harm, which is a how, which in itself, when we're thinking about successes, is its own form of victory, right? It's its own form of trajectory, it's its own form of movement. And we're asking ourselves, how do we do this work? Did I do it right? I think I fucked up. Am I fucked up, right? We're in some of those questions. And we're also sitting in, I think, some really interesting crossroads, right? So addressing violence outside of the government, outside of the state, has happened for centuries. I happen to be, I think many of us have these stories in our families, and when I used to work at the Audre Lorde Project, we had this process where people would ask their family members how they kept themselves safe, recognizing that as a group of queer and trans people of color, we did not have the ability to rely on the state in our lives and in our histories. So I come from my own lineage. My mom grew up in New Orleans, she grew up in the segregated South, and they had their own safety system because calling the police was calling white citizens councils, was calling the Klan, which was not safety. So we're not talking about new shit. We are talking about how we do it, right? How we do it well, how we grow. So the crossroads is this work has happened for centuries, and then the other piece is the way that a lot of us were raised, socialized, or trained to be relational has a lot of trauma within it, right? Has a lot of if you love me, you would do X. Okay, we've all been in that relationship, right? Or love looks like Y. And I know the popular conceptualization of the anti-violence movement talks about power and control and sometimes says things like, it's not about love, but I actually feel like my last 2 harmful relations were people loving me till my spirit broke. It was love I didn't ask for, love that was not consensual, love that was about them, not me, but it wasn't actually the absence of love. It was a really skewed and it just wasn't safe. So I want to drop us into that concept of when are the ways that we're relational not safe? So I'm hoping that this is less of a panel and more I had a really well-lit, very clean living room. And we're so just, and maybe it's manifesting things I want in my life, which is maybe, you know, a Brooklyn apartment with a little bit more space. But so, thank you for coming to dinner with me. In my living room, I wouldn't be standing unless I was handing you some food or cooking some. But so that's how we're going to be in conversation with each other. We want to be in conversation with you, and we want to kind of get into the nuance, get into what is unclear, what are we still figuring out, where do we not have alignment. I'm going to name a little bit about these amazing people. They can tell you more about themselves. And these are not their bios, these are my favorite things about them, so. Because, you know, it's my panel. So, Shira Hassan, who, one of the co-founders of YWEP, Young Women's Empowerment Project, a founder of Just Practice, what I would call a practitioner's practitioner, a quiet genius. And Shira's legacy, you're already in it. She may not tell you, you may not know, it will live on longer than a lot of us are here, but she has done so much work that has influenced so many of us. And so we've got Shira Hassan here. Then we have Amita Swadhin. So Amita's work has bridged macro to micro in a way that I think very few people have. Whether you saw Amita testify at Jeff Sessions' hearing, whether you've seen the work of Secret Survivors, co-founder of Mirror Memoirs, has done a ton of work about both like within their own personal family and also like modeling like how does accountability look from the personal, and also how do we take the lessons we learned there to a broader context. So we've got Amita Swadhin. All right, Leah, this is the part where like we really get if I've practiced how to pronounce your name right. Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasinha? Lakshmi Piepzna. Okay, I'm gonna keep working. I love you too. Sometimes we fuck up on stage. So Leah is a writer. She has worked within activist communities, within communities with people with disabilities, and she's been bringing the lessons through art, through poetry, through writing, through organizing, to say that there is a place for all of us in this work, and it doesn't mean, and people with disabilities are not on the sidelines. In fact, if we take the lessons learned from doing community accountability and transformative justice within disabled communities, there is a way that we learn and create space for all of us. Adrienne Marie Brown bridges what she calls kitchen table mediation, somatics, facilitation, emergent strategy, pleasure activism. So there's a piece around Adrienne's work that is about concretizing tactics, creating big picture thoughts, and also keeping it clear and simple for all of us to learn. I'm sure you've heard of Adrienne. We're very, very, very excited to be here with her. Mimi writes the things we need. Mimi Kim, if you have seen that long-ass 600-page long creative interventions toolkit, you've probably seen a tool from it, used it, and as we know, if you say to her, this part isn't in it, she'll tell you what page it's on. Whether it's creative interventions, storytelling organizing project, or a whole host of things, it's about not only doing the work, but documenting it so we continually learn from it. Thank you for that, Mimi. And Priya Rai, who's the Community Solutions Organizer at API Chaya. This idea of like, what is the role of kind of survivor support organizations in this work? Is there a place? What is the place? What's the overstep? I think that Priya helps us see those questions, sit in those questions, and get into those questions. So this is the start of my living room. Y'all are the rest of it. I want to start with just what is harm? There was a point where we talked about violence, and then we started to say violence and harm, then we started to say harm. But what does addressing harm mean to each of you? How do you define it? What does that look like? And we can go from there. I would love Mimi. Yeah, I'm gonna call on y'all. Okay. That's a big decline, Mimi. Okay. You're going? Oh, you're pointing at yourself? Okay. Thank you, Mimi.
Hello, can you hear me? So we can see how consent works, right? Hey, y'all. I wish Esteban was sitting right here and could start, but it looks like it's me. And I'm going to find probably all of these questions a little difficult. When somebody says define something, obviously you're talking to somebody who helped to write something that's 600 pages. So clearly, I'm not very good at the concise answer. And I also really continue to be baffled by words and come from a time when we said community accountability, community-based interventions to violence, and transformative justice, and made sure we always interchanged between them so that we weren't giving out this message that there are particular words that we have to use to be right, to be cool, because you know those words change in 6 months, right? So we have to be mindful of words. We have to understand the limitation of words, particularly in the English language. And we have to understand that words like harm, I come from a time when we moved away from talking always about, let's say, domestic violence, sexual assault, and talk more broadly about harm for a reason, but also understood that when we say harm, we're not just talking about some abstract form of something happened. We are talking about actually very specific acts of violence, acts of maybe perhaps more minor acts of somebody said something that hurt my feelings. But there are specifics. So when we use, we do have to use more generalized terms to talk about a politic, about harm, about something like accountability, but that we understand that there are very specific meanings that make sense in our lives, that when we actually work on these things around processes or addressing something that somebody did to us personally, that we're addressing that specific thing and that we get good at talking about that specific thing. We might not call it harm then. We might not call somebody the person who did harm. Again, moving away from perpetrator, predator, rapist, batterer, all of those terms that we've used and continue to use, but talked about people who've done harm. But then when talking about something specific that happened, we might say that that person committed rape, that the person committed a form of violation that we may learn to and feel comfortable or uncomfortable talking about very specifically. So I'm just going to give that as a response to, as somebody who has been among those introducing a broader term harm, but not wanting to lose that this means something very specific in our lives.
Adrienne.
Is this working? Okay. I wrote my thoughts down because I've been on the road for a long time and I'm reaching a level of delirium and I'm really intimidated by the teachers I'm on the stage with, so I wanted to get it right. So to me, harm is an external wound to your wholeness, more than a bump, more than an accident. Harm is what convinces us that in this abundant world, we only deserve to survive. It convinces us that material and emotional scarcity is our lot. My work is very much about returning people to the truth of miraculous abundance. I am bleeding as I write this, a reminder that miracles are messy, and that I'm alive, but I'm not in charge. Life is a bloody, magical, messy, beautiful gift, and inside that I play with scale. Instead of impossibly wide, I go satisfyingly deep. Instead of focusing on the whole and getting stagnant in my insignificance, I invite myself and others to get close in and to get dirty. Operate at your own scale, and then maybe grow. If everyone was practicing transformative justice in their own lives, we'd have enough. The natural world gives us some clues. Abundance is healthy. It's normal to have plenty. And plenty is relative. Each species is programmed for the precise amount of sunlight it needs and how to swallow light. How do we balance between the rich fertility and the terror of darkness, the abundant life and the dangerous fire of light? We need balance, divergence, and emergence. The complex systems and patterns we long for, the justice and accountability that allows for our whole humanity, it all comes from and is built from relatively simple interactions. Calling people in the Black liberation movement into support when I see them calling each other out online. Sitting at my kitchen table, offering tea. That's where I invite people into accountability. Not to be friends, not to be joyful, not to even necessarily be comrades, but to be accountable to something much larger and grandiose and magnificent than ourselves. And nature says, enjoy this. We've been given bodies so brilliant that some of us have even reclaimed the pleasure of a whip. In just a few short generations, y'all. We long to feel satisfied and content, and we'll do that any way we can. We long for belonging and dignity. We want to return to each other. We are born into another's hands. We are a species meant to hold and be held. We live on an orgasmic planet that is fecund and perfect, but can we see ourselves home again after all this harm? My work is to remind us to imagine, to remind us that we are responsible for shaping the future, and to point us down and all around at our teacher, parent, planet, and to remind us not to sleep through the sensational experience of being alive, the heaven here on earth, the blessing of having a body, an individual and a collective body that can recover, that can learn, that can remember to love. So visionary fiction, emergent strategy, pleasure activism, transformative breakups, kitchen table mediations, boundaries are better than disposal, abundant justice, liberation, that's all the miracles I know.
I want to go to your church. I want to know where you are every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. That's where I'm going to be. Let's start TJ Church. There is a Church of Harm Reduction at Mikoyama if you're here. So, you know, I come to this work via the sex trade, via people who, calling the cops wasn't an option. Like it wasn't, we were all people who were using drugs or trading sex for money, or involved or who looked like people who would be harmed or targeted by asking for help. And so there's this interesting relationship in my mind between help and harm. And I think what I like to do for myself is I like to ask us to do three things. I want to define harm at the individual level, like I want to define it for myself. And for me, that actually changes quite a bit. It's not, I don't have fixed boundaries around that. There's a lot of things that were not, didn't think were harmful at the time that I was engaging in them, that I'm now like, okay, wait a minute. And then those things also saved my life. And so there's like this, harm is just not only relative externally, but relative internally to whatever moment I'm living and surviving in. This is where Young Women's Empowerment Project geniuses coined the term self-harm resilience as a way of reclaiming self-injury and what that means. So I think about harm in terms of how we define it for ourselves. Then I think about it in terms of how we need to define it in our organizations. Like Just Practice defined harm for us. It was not only what we included in harm, but also which harms we were going to work to address through community accountability. We knew that we couldn't do them all, so we wanted to address intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and sometimes domestic violence, depending. Those things are interrelated, and the names change depending on how you do it. And so we then said, okay, we're going to define those things for us, and the things that fall within this is what we're going to do. And I think the invitation is for you all to individually define harm for yourself and to think through the distinctions between help, harm, and also like what is offense? Like I want us to be able to like actively disagree. I want to be able to be wrong. And I know that we have the skills to do that. And then I want to separate that from harm, which I see as lowercase h, capital H. And I want to not flatten all these things and not collapse them all into each other. I want us to really, I was having a conversation with Beth Ritchie a few years ago, whose book Arrested Justice is you have to, I hope it's on the table. One of the things she was saying was like, when Insight first got going, we were talking about like the person living with you who was trying to kill you. And like that's shifted over time, and I think that's good. I think we needed to broaden that so that we can include, it shouldn't only be about our immediate survival. We should also get to define our quality of life. And at the same time, we can't also, each thing is different on purpose. Like each thing we experience is very different from each other. And so we need responses and ways of thinking about those things differently. So I think, yeah.
Hi, everyone. I think that is so critical. I really appreciate that. Also, what am I doing on this panel, y'all? Look at all these people. This is amazing. I'm like, I read your book. I use your shit. I read your book. I'm just here. That's fine. I don't have a book. It's cool. It's fine, y'all. Everything's great. But I think that idea, we have expanded the definition of harm so much over the years, right? To our benefit and to our detriment, both. And I think it's so critical. The way we define things, issues, specific incidents also shapes then what our response is going to be. And I'm going to out myself. I asked the question about weaponization to the last panel because I have seen so much in queer and trans people of color communities in Seattle as people are learning more and more about these frameworks and understanding more about transformative justice and accountability, tied with this idea that we use harm as kind of like a broad term to encapsulate everything. Like, you're not lifting up your share you're not doing the chores you need to be doing in our shared home, and also child sexual abuse, right? And we're like, okay, it's harm. And so, what is then the response that we have to that? And so I've seen then when there's like a chore issue and it's like, we need a process. We need a process and you've harmed me. And it's like, do we need a process about that? You know what I mean? Can we just sit down? I think, and we also think about process and conflict as the same in a way that is troubling, maybe, right? So I loved so much the first panel really focusing on look at your own shit, right? The revolution starts at home, and people are coming to me let's train, I want to be a facilitator for a process. And I'm like, you have had an issue with your roommate for 9 months, and you haven't had one conversation about it. Do you really want to be sitting down and being like, yo, what's good? Let's talk about rape? Probably not. You know what I mean? Talk about the dishes, Shannon, right? What Shannon's saying, talk about the dishes. That's where it starts. And I think also, right, I have done a ton of work around queer relationships, and I have also seen weaponization as a tool of abuse, these terms, and the use of the word harm. So the person who actually has more power and control in that situation is now using all of this as another form of maintaining power. So when I think about harm, I think we really need to start examining like the power dynamics that happen in every situation. And we're in such a unique moment in time, which is incredible that we are talking so much more about this, and we are talking about survivorship and what that looks like and what that means. And I think that that has made us so scared to lean into those things, right? It's such a weird moment of like, I believe you, which I want us to say that, obviously, right? Like, we're actually still not really doing that, but I want us to be doing that. And I want us to also to be able to lean into that relationship, like Sonia was bringing up on the first panel, and say, like, let's talk about that more. And not, yeah, I want us to like be brave in investigating those spaces.
Okay, I'm starting a timer because they gave me 5 minutes to testify against Jeff Sessions, but I get 3 minutes to talk to you. No shade, though. Just saying. So I'm also super flooded emotionally being here. There's like so much in my body going on, and also like New York is home for me. My family moved here when I was a year and a half old to Queens, so it's also like the site of all the violence and so much healing in my life, so I just want to name that. I'm going to try to do this with you, though, but I'm looking at my phone for notes. So I really second what Shira said about not flattening harm. If you don't know my story, basically I am that survivor who is talked about by the criminal legal system as if everything that system does is for me, right? It's really, it disgusts me all the time, and I very much I was talking at dinner about wanting to have a campaign for those of us who were harmed in the way that society wants us to think is like the most egregious way of being harmed, to say not in our name, right? The same way that we talk about not wanting war in our name. I don't want this criminal legal system in my name. I was raped over 400 times by my dad between ages 4 and 12. So really, I mean it when I say, like, I am told all the time that system is supposedly for me. And then I had that system enacted in my life very much against my consent when I was 13. And it harmed me more. And I know I'm not alone in that experience. So when I think about harm, I definitely think about, where does it come from? Like, what's the origin story? A lot of people who buy into the criminal legal system want the origin story of me to be about my father. But how can that be true, right? He was born a baby who was innocent and pure, just like every baby. You know, I say this a lot, but no baby is born a rapist, right? And he was raped as a child more than once, around the age of 5 or 6 for the first time. So, you know, whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that he did not get support? Is it the fact that his family couldn't hold that? Well, whose fault was that? Who do we blame for the fact that my grandmother, his mother, had to live through a genocide because a white person drew a line through the state that her people are from? You know, when the British left India, a white man who had never set foot on our soil drew a line creating Pakistan and India, and it caused the largest forced migration of people in a short amount of time in modern human history. Obviously, the African slave trade is the largest forced migration of people. So sometimes when I think about who to blame for this harm, I'm a little bit at a loss. I really want us, oh, that's already 3 minutes, see? I knew it wasn't enough time. I'll just wrap by saying, I want us to continue to make distinctions between legally and socially sanctioned violence, and the ways that we who are actually in relationship with each other, trying to strive to a world towards justice, hurt each other because we don't know how to heal. And those are different kinds of harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Leah.
All the feelings. Okay, I also am gonna look at my phone on my thigh because I don't have a sense of time. This is what I got, 20 years ago, one of my entry points into doing this work was being physically abused by my partner, who was somebody who'd already done time, who was also a queer, working class person of color, right? And back then, I was in a movement space that was like black and brown prison abolitionists, where I literally was told, you're a strong woman of color, you can take it, right? There was like, I had to like, was talking to people in the movement being like, domestic violence is bad. And they're like, is it really? Like, you know, and that's different, and it's not different in spaces. And I know some of you know the spaces I'm talking about, right? So that was 1997, 1998, you know, when I was in my early 20s. And then I was thinking, you know, fast forward to 2012, I'm in Oakland. You know, there's been 15 years of like insight and insight adjacent, you know, Black and brown feminists organizing around TJ and around what do we do except for the cops. And somebody hit me up because I was, you know, one of the TJ ladies or whatever, being like, you know how to do this shit, right? And I'd be like, I'm trying to sleep, please leave me alone. And it was somebody I knew in community who was like, me and my partner broke up and they cheated on me. Can you hold a circle process? And I was like, fuck you, no. And I was like, and I was a stressed out, overworked, burnt out person who was like, we barely have enough of these things. We barely know how to do TJ when it works for murder and rape. And you want me to what? Okay. And here's the thing, like in some of the lead up to this kitchen table, you know, this dining room table, this nice dining room, living room table that, you know, Ejeris has over here, we've, you know, and a lot of people on this panel already have talked about, God, everything's harm these days. And I'm like, I know. And also, I've been in spaces where I'm like, I'm frustrated, we need to differentiate, there's like different things or different things. But I also think we're at a moment of a huge amount of possibility, and I think that some of what is going on is that Pandora's box has been opened by our work, and everybody's like, there's so much harm and abuse and violence in the world. And I think that that's overwhelming so often, because if it's like, you know, it's like that Joy Harjo poem, like I was born with eyes that never closed. Like when we actually open our eyes to like, or open our ways of witnessing to all of the ways that there is abuse and harm in this world, it's like, wow, what the hell do we do? You know? And so now I wish I could go back to that person who was like, hey, yeah, you know, my partner cheated on me and I want to have a process, and dig a little deeper and be like, so what's going on? Because we also know as survivors, I haven't met a single survivor, including of the most egregious, you know, overt harm, who's not been told, oh, it's not that bad. You know, maybe you're making it up. Maybe you're crazy, you know? And then when I think about as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse from my white mother, you know, shout out to the mixed race survivors in the house who faced racism in our own homes. Yeah. The overt stuff happened when I was young. Most of my abuse actually happened through emotional abuse and psychological violence. And no court and a lot of my people won't see that as real, right? But it's actually affected me in some ways more, right? Am I at time yet? Yeah. I will just say that I think that there's enormous work to do and enormous possibility, and I believe in our capacity to face all the ways we've been harmed and figure out how to fucking take care of it.
We don't have a ton of time, so I want to do one question, and then I want to get us into kind of having more of y'all at the table. I don't know everyone's story here, but I know a lot of our stories. And so I think everyone here is either a survivor or we're majority survivors, right? And so one of the things I think that we really know is how tender and vulnerable and frightening it is to ask for support. And then we also know as survivors what it means to hold that, right? Like the kind of co-tenderness, right? Like that. And so recognizing what we're already talking about, harm, and how there is a part of it that's incredibly self-defined. There's a part of it that is about what happens. And there are times where our either definitions, capacities, or politics clash. So I'm really curious about how do people navigate those conversations with survivors, right? Recognizing what we're holding, recognizing what it means for someone to say, I want your support, when someone is asking for something that either outside of what we would call the politics of transformative justice or community accountability, or outside, like how do we, those no's, those declines, those not me, those this is the other thing, I just want to hear how people hold that, because I think that is a part of the work that if I were to say what is the conversation that happens at my living room that does not happen like this, it is that part when we are navigating the nitty-gritty of what should be held, what can be held, or what we don't believe should be held like that. I won't, but if you want to start. That was the manipulative one.
So, I think, so I have a parable, and then, but first I want to like answer the question directly, which is like, I feel like survivors, and myself included, which is foreshadowing for the parable that's about to come, need to be held accountable to their best day and their worst day at the same time. That like the gift that you're giving me in my life when I've experienced especially sexual violence is to know that I'm in process and that my revenge fantasies are not why I'm calling you, right? I'm calling you for these deeper reasons that may not be at the front of my mind right then, because there's a million things. But I think one concrete piece is that these things can't be done in crisis. Like community accountability work can't be done in crisis because, I mean, I used to say all the time, I used to act really hard, like I invented "kill your rapist," that phrase, which probably I wrote somewhere that you've recently seen, because I was very prolific here in New York in the 90s with that Sharpie. I traveled with it, so I assume Giuliani didn't get rid of all of it, and I tried really hard to invent that while I was doing transformative justice work because I couldn't call the cops. So these things simultaneously exist. Like no one was going to help me kill those people. Well, yeah, maybe some of you. That's true. Okay, wrong room. So. Yeah. But I do think that I was held accountable to my best day, and that best day includes transformation. So the quick parable is that, so I'm going to share the story. I've actually never shared it publicly before, and it just happened about 1.5 years ago. I was dating someone who I'd known for a really long time. We dated previously, picked back up. And I had what I'm calling a non-consensual sexual experience with them. I don't know what I want to call it, what I'll call it in the future. But right now I'm calling it a non-consensual sexual experience. This was about 1.5 years ago. And I like ran out of there, did the shower, phoned a friend and was like, what the hell just happened? And then after I sat with it, I called them. I read like a bunch of books that these people probably wrote, right? And I like did all the Googling, looked through my own freaking workshop shit. And then I, because I do believe in the toolkit actually. And so I do, it's helped me. And so then I made I called them like 2 days later and I was like, I said all the things, like, you did not do right by me. Like, here's what I need you to hear. And they were, like, awesome. And they said this thing that was like, if you weren't safe, then I wasn't safe. If you're not safe, then I'm not safe. And I was like, okay. I just, like, that was huge for me. And then, we stayed dating, and then we stopped 4 or 5 months later, totally unrelated. Then 4 or 5 months after that, my rage hit, right? Like, and it hit hard, and I processed this with Priya, I processed this with Rachel and Dina, her part of Just Practice, and I was like, what the hell happened? Like, I did all the things, like I did it, right? Like, I told my therapist I did it, like I mastered Survivor, like I did it, And so, like, the takeaways for me is that, like, survivors need time. Time is the thing. It's not crisis. Like, I did a really good job in a crisis and then somehow still sold myself short, right? And I'm not going to go back and have a process with them. I'm done with them. But, healing is nonlinear. TJ is messy. It needs to be. And, we are all survivors. This is not about other people. This is about us. What's precious about this is that this is not a professional model. What's precious about this is that we're calling each other. And so you don't need me to sign the paperwork on my worst day. So...
So 2 things, you're my great teacher and inspiration at all times. And also, it's really exciting because I realized sitting here that my life has been massively transformed by 2 important tarot readings. And one was from you and one was from you. Oh my G. Anyway, I just was like, wait a second. There's a tarot thing going on. But related to this question, the way that I work with folks around this is I ask them what would satisfy them in the process. And because I realized when I first started doing mediation stuff, I was making assumptions. I was like, what will satisfy me is what would satisfy you, right? And for me, whenever harm has happened for me, punishment was not satisfying. Like being like, oh, you going to prison and having your life ruined is not gonna satisfy what I need. And for me, restorative justice also has not been satisfying enough, right? Like I'm like, us getting back to like good is not enough. Like what I want to do is make sure the harm can never ever happen again between us and between you and any other person that you deal with. But that's for me, right? So when I sit down with people, I want to know that they're interested in making sure the harm never happens again. And then that I'll say, I can help you then, right? And if it's not that, if you want a different kind of satisfaction, then I'm like, here are some great places that you can go that are connected to that kind of satisfaction. And I can never recommend you to get satisfaction that involves the state like that. So it's like having my own boundaries as a practitioner in the conversation with survivors so that it's not about them. I'm not saying you're not going hard enough or your analysis is whack or anything like that, because that's not the thing you need to hear when you just experience harm. It's like, oh, and also I'm an incomplete feminist or some shit. It's just like, no. But you might be 18 and you might be like, I want to kill this person, right? And I'm like, and I remember feeling that way. And then also the moment I realized that for me, that wasn't going to do it. The other thing I want to talk about just briefly is gender and pace. Because I hold now, like most of the mediations that I hold, most of the people that come to my kitchen table are people who have been dating each other, who are then inside of movement space, and the dating thing has gone awry. And now, this didn't used to happen, but now, whenever the dating goes awry, it was abusive, right? So people are like, we were in an abusive relationship. And I'm really trying to tease this out a lot more. I'm like, what do you mean exactly, right? Like, what is harm, what is abuse? And who defines what is abuse? And how do we acknowledge that abusive dynamics are multi-dimensional? Like, there's roles that everyone's playing in them. And all of that. So there's a lot of it that I'm like, was it abusive relationship or was it a bad relationship? Was it a bad relationship that y'all didn't know how to handle? And now, is it a situation where we need to break the movement in order to satisfy y'all being able to survive in some way? Or is it possible, maybe, that the movement is more important than what happened between y'all? And that doesn't mean what makes what happened between y'all not important, but there's something more important. So trying to sit with people and be like, that is important. You are important. You getting your full process is important. And there's something more important. And so inside of that, I find that women and folks who are on the feminine side of gender place, whatever it made up gender shit that we do, tend to be like, it's gonna take a while. It's gonna take years. I'm down to be in the process. I'm down to take long breaks between sessions so that I can feel and integrate. And folks on the masculine side of it are like, I need to have this conversation right now. I need it resolved right now. I need a statement right now. It needs to be done right now. And so that's something I'm also trying to be in more nuanced conversations with people around, is like, here's what I know about how long it takes from my own internal experience. There's people who harmed me. There's someone who harmed me like 7 years ago, and I'm like, I'm just now rageful, right? I was like, we already went through a whole process, but now I'm mad, right? And, you know, and Don't Hurt Yourself came out in the interim, right? So I'm like, I have a soundtrack, now I understand what I'm feeling, you know. But I want to say that piece too, because I feel like being able to sit down with people and say, there's something between forever and immediately that is the right pace for us. And then there's something between the whole movement has to stop or just I never date again or something. There's something between that scale that is actually going to be right in there. You'll find the piece you need to actually continue being a radical person in the world.
Okay, so I want to talk about myself for a moment because it's hard to talk about other people's case studies. There is one instance where I have said no to a survivor, and it went terribly awry because she accused me and the other South Asian queer women who were trying to help her, even though we didn't know her, which is a mistake. Don't help somebody that you don't know without taking time to know them. We should have, this is like 10 years ago almost, but she decided that we were then enabling an abuser because we would not participate in outing publicly or shaming tactics, even though we were putting a support team together to engage him. So it's not like we were just letting him off the hook. But I want to talk about a time that I have engaged in tactics that are not in alignment with transformative justice for my own accountability. Because I have been told by beloveds in this room even, and no shade, okay? But I've been told so many times, well, your story is too big. We don't know what to do with your story. We're not ready yet. Our movement's not ready yet. You're just gonna have to wait. So it's like, I don't know, maybe next lifetime? I only get this go round, y'all. I'm 40, right? My dad is still alive. My dad is still alive. So I've had to figure out what does accountability look like, given that I don't believe in the prison system, right? But he's still out in the world, and I know for a fact that he is still harming people, including people I'm related to. So here's something I want to say that relates to the accountability plenary that just happened. I think it was Esteban who was saying accountability is an invitation to stay in relationship. But when you're talking about people who were raped by the people who made us, I did not consent to that relationship, okay? I was born into that family. I do not consent to stay connected to those people that I share blood with. That is called blood supremacy, okay? It is a form of supremacy that operates in our society, that is state-sanctioned, that is legally sanctioned, and if we really want to talk about consent, we have to give survivors a true and real option to leave our blood families when that is the right thing to do. Part of transformative justice really needs to be about, like, please stop using the slogans of all families need to stay together no matter what. That is not real. My family is better because it is apart. I have not spoken to my dad's entire family since I was 16 years old, and it is awesome, okay? So sometimes when the movement is not ready for the conditions that are our lives, here's the thing, my story's not rare. That is the sick and sad thing about this world, and I know that because I have heard so many of your stories over the past 20 years. So many of us are being raped by the people who made us, and we deserve better than we are ready to hold right now. So what do we do with that? Well, I created a theater project. My friends protested my dad at the Queens Museum of Art, and you can read about that on the Feminist Wire. I spoke about it in the Senate. Sometimes we have to think about ways to publicly out the people who are harming us, because these kind of networks that we're trying for in radical, mostly queer and trans people of color communities, we're so far from that in the average blood family. And we gotta figure out what the in-between looks like, because, you know, I might die before the movement is ready to hold somebody like my dad accountable. So I'm gonna try experimenting on what accountability and healing looks like in a way that's still outside the state system, and that's not transformative justice, but it's the best I can do right now.
Thank you all. So there's a theme of questions that is there's a theme of questions. We're grouping them into themes. So if you have questions, I see you note-taking. If you have questions, bring them. We have a little time, and we have the whole day, too. We have the all day, too. Yeah, we actually can keep going. But no, Miriam, don't worry. So there's a theme about when accountability becomes harm. And around whether that's in the ask or call out into accountability, whether that's the process, whether that is something that we feel that the person is saying as an accurate statement, whether it sounds like either weaponization or manipulation of, or a form of not wanting to be accountable. I'm not gonna do this because this is harm, right? So I'm not gonna separate all those out because I think those are just like different shadings of the area. But I would love to hear your thoughts around what do we do, or how have you navigated that idea of that, that sometimes accountability and harm intersect?
You may be waiting for a brilliant answer to that question. I'm going to a little bit bridge from the last conversation that we've been having. And that's, I think, as somebody who I think was part of some of the earlier part of this work, that what we can see is there's something about pacing and spaciousness that's really important. And that so many of us in the urgency of trying to address harm have looked towards something that looks very rigid and in some ways mirrors the criminal justice system, right? And I have to say is that I have been part of that. I've participated in that. It was out of good intentions, but the result of that maybe has been this accountability as harm. For us saying that transformative justice is good no matter what, but for us to do it, I don't know how many times I've heard people say to the person who's done harm, we're demanding that you do this because I love you, and then walked away from the process and said, okay, you do all the work. That is not the kind of transformative justice processes that we're looking for. Those are processes that still happen because we have a lot of emotion, we have a lot of rage, we can't deal with the complexity of emotion, we don't have the time. A lot of people want to have one meeting. I still hear this happen. Or maybe two, or maybe three, and maybe I'm gonna zoom in because actually I can't make it all the way over there. This is work that has to happen with spaciousness, with love, with time, and with in-person time when we can. And people don't do that anymore, and they don't actually think it's important. I'm not saying everybody, and we're all guilty of this, right? In the rush of everything that, or in the, self-care, I'm not gonna go. We have to actually prioritize some of this work if we're gonna do it well, but we have to figure out how to do that without using manipulation, guilt, and burnout. And that's really, really hard. So I love, just reading Emergent Strategies, thank you so much, because just in reading the book and the pace of that book. You read my book? Absolutely. And we have a new little TJ circle, thanks to Mia, who said, you need to have your little group here, your pod. So that's the first thing we read. And looking towards nature, looking towards our natural bodies, looking towards breathing and pace, and yet still understanding that we can't leave the dishes for the next 2 years. We actually have to get to them. Yes. How do we do that? And I think that's the balance that our world does not train us to do well at all, but that we really need to do. So I just am really appreciating this conversation. It is so important, not just for us as a movement, but I know for me personally, we can't, also, there's still a trend towards people saying, we're gonna call this one person because they're gonna be able to hold a process, but you know what, we all have to learn how to do it. Yes. And we don't all have to be the facilitator. Maybe we're just going to be the person that brings the tea, or we're going to bring a little bit of food, because that's what I do well. That's my contribution. We don't have to do everything. Let's figure out how we're going to get together, figure out what people do well in what situations. We cannot do this alone. I know I can't do this alone. I've been doing it a long time. I can't do it alone. I don't have the answers. But we collectively do have the answers. I know we have the answers in this room. This room is powerful. So let's build from this. Let's look at some of the toolkits. There's some new ones coming out, fumbling. There's a new book coming out. But also, let's just talk to each other and learn about what works for us and what works for others.
Thank you. I think Leah and then Shira.
You do have the answers, Mimi. You have some of the answers. I just want you to know that. Okay, I have a whole lot of stuff. First of all, I want to say something about processes, right? Because I think that a lot of the time people are talking about transformative justice, community accountability, and it's all processes, processes. We have to do these processes. And everyone's nodding like, yeah, and then people don't do it. And I don't think it's because we're lazy or we don't want to. I think it's because it's overwhelming. And I think that, you know, it actually is a learning curve. And what I want to say, I want to complicate some stuff a little bit. Not that people here don't also believe it, because I know they do, but like, I think that sometimes we get caught up in the, oh, you know, TJ means a 3-year circle process and that's it. And people are just like, I don't have time to go to the grocery store. How the hell am I going to do that? And I want to say that we all want like the golden ticket of like the person who caused harm realizes what they did, completely transforms and is a different person. And that's a big ass, $10 million thing to get. And I also want to say that it can also be some of those little things that you mentioned, Mimi, that we can bring. I mean, sometimes TJ, I've seen people in my life, like an effective intervention was when a friend of mine went up to my abusive ex and said, hey, dude, can you leave? She's not okay with you being here. Can you step out? Or the story I tell about when I was in my early 20s and my like femme friends of color would just go into every club, every public space that my partner or my ex-partner could be at and would scan the whole thing, do a perimeter check, and then come either talk to him or come out and be like, okay, he's here, do you want to go in or leave? And if you go in, we'll surround you the whole time. That's TJ. Okay? And, it's something that we could do. Like my friend who's just like, can you stop hassling that person to the bus stop? That's TJ, that's intervention. Right? Figuring out how to hold space for people who are having psychiatric disability crisis without calling 911 is a learnable skill to just be like, okay, let's just keep things chill. Have you slept? Have you eaten? Let's go for a walk. Like all of this stuff is stuff that we can do. And you can do 10 minutes of it and it counts. Right? And I want to say that because I think that when we open up the ideas of what's possible, that helps more things be possible. And that question that's posed of like, what's hard? I'm like, I think knowing this whole beautiful dream of the world when the prisons are gone and like we all don't dispose of each other, everyone's like, awesome, how the hell do I even start? And real quick, I just want to speak about violence and rage. And I think that something I see happening a lot is someone's like, what's TJ? And someone else is like, oh, well, it's great. We don't throw each other away and we love each other and it's wonderful. And then that survivor's like, when do I get to be angry? And sometimes we really push down, no, you're being disposable. And I'm like, actually, rage is complicated, but like Elizabeth Long, who's a prison abolitionist, white femme in Texas, did this thing online where she talked about like the healing power of like rage rituals, where she's like, go break some bottles, play Goodbye Earl, play whatever your music is, like play like, play like all of that stuff. I think that we get in trouble as TJ workers when we come across as looking like we want everyone to be good survivors and never have a bad feeling. Right? Like that's when people were like, fuck you, I don't like the cops, but I don't like this TJ shit either. And I think that we need to make room for those uncomfortable feelings. And this is my last thing. There's a period where I knew a lot of people who were like vigilantism. Have you guys seen the film Born in Flames? Anybody? Everyone had watched Born in Flames 98 times, and they wanted to be the women's army and go out with like, the like baseball bats and stuff. And I was like, I don't want to be. These weren't all middle-class people, but I was like, have you actually seen someone get a beat down? Because it's really different when you do it than when you have a fantasy about it. And you know what you have afterwards? You have nightmares. But then I was like, oh, why are they doing it? And my friend Chanel Gallant, who's in Toronto doing sex work, TJ stuff, was just like, okay, but you have to ask yourself, anytime anyone's doing something you don't like, you have to ask, why are they drawn to it? And I was like, oh, so helpful. Yeah, people are drawn to that because it's effective. You can see impact when you hit somebody. You can't see impact in a 3-year process that maybe didn't work. So it makes sense people are drawn towards that. So I think that some of what works is just like acknowledging all of that as a starting place and being like, that makes sense. Where do we go from here after we acknowledge that? The end.
I also just want to introduce the concept of harm reduction here. Like, I think, like, you know, one of the reasons why Miriam and I started the Just Practice Collaborative along with Dina, Lewis, Rachel Kydor, Anna Mercado, Kisa Reynolds in Chicago, was because, you know, there was so much harm happening in processes that we were witnessing, and we wanted survivors to have more options for successful processes. We wanted to create training and things that were bite-sized, and we wanted space where we could practice, make mistakes, and fuck up, and that's really like the bottom line. And I want to introduce harm reduction here because as I was listening to the dishes metaphor which I love, and I started thinking about Young Women's Empowerment, right? Because we were all young people of color in the sex trade and street economy. So you know what? We had that dishes fight. We got paper plates, and like I'm sitting with like, what does that say? You know what I mean? Like we did so much accountability work internally. We had so many conversations. It was all about making like accountability less scary. It was all that beautiful seatbelts metaphor. It was, you know, all about and then sometimes you get paper plates. Like sometimes harm reduction is the thing that we offer ourselves, because a circle for everything is not, I don't know. I don't want a circle about the dishes. Like, and so so the intersection of accountability and harm is real. It's there. It's there because of rage. It's there because of exhaustion. It's there because it does, when someone has caused harm and they need to be accountable, sometimes harm happens in their lives in order to step into accountability. So like that intersection is real. And also harm reduction is so valuable and so important for us as well to remember that not everything is an opportunity for a process, and that you can get paper plates. Although, you know, now that was 10 years ago. It's recycle them. Yes, also recycle them. Compost, yes. Thank you for West Coast friends.
So I have good news, and I have some news that you might find like harder news. The good news is that lunch is 4 minutes away.
I'm hungry.
The harder news is that means this panel has to start to close. The better news is that we can interact with you not from a stage. So what I'm sorry, I'm grappling in my head of like, I want to give y'all closing and I want people to eat. So it's really like, I think I'm going to choose food. So,
You don't trust us. That's fair.
yeah. No, it's just counting the time and everything, but yeah, that's true. So, yeah, also true. So I think it's time for us to kind of like transition this conversation into all the ways, into workshops, into all the ways that we can be organic. The one thing I want to say is that, as I said earlier, right, like what happens here, this living room, this us talking with, but sometimes at you, does not make a movement, right? Does not make the thing that we need to build TJ. It helps inspire, it helps support, it helps getting you to focus on where you want to be and where you see yourself. But what I'm really, really hoping for in this is, what is your commitment to furthering this work? And I am a classic, old school, door-knocking, base-building organizer, which means I don't actually leave a room without an ask, especially not with a big group of people in front of me. So my ask is to literally spend these next 2 minutes before lunch writing down, like, what is your commitment to furthering TJ, both in your life, but in the lives of people around you, whether those are movement spaces, whether that's your family, whether that's about the dishes, whether that's about your household, whether that's political space, whether that's political organizing, right? Because one thing that I think this work is we talked about relationships, and we also talked about that way that it is both the ways that we engage with each other every day and the work that we build to create a world where people can rely on each other as opposed to the state when we are harmed. So with that said, I would love to kind of thank all the amazing panelists who were here in my living room.